the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology of the House of Commons. In keeping with Section 102, a standing order from January 2022, the committee is meeting to study the draft report on critical and essential minerals. We will be meeting in a hybrid fashion. In keeping with the House order, members can participate on Zoom or in person. For those of you who will be in person in Ottawa, you know what the rules are. I would invite you to act accordingly. I'd like to take a brief moment to thank the many witnesses who we'll be hearing from today. Thank you for being with us. Personally, and we have witnesses as individuals. Charles Burton, Senior Fellow, Centre for Advancing Canada's Interests Abroad, Mr. Karim Zaghib, Dr. Karim Zaghib, Professor at Concordia University and Professor of Practice at McGill University. From the Canada's Zero Emission Vehicle Supply Chain Alliance, we have Mathieu Fortier, and we have Daniel Breton from Electric Mobility Canada, and from the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, we have Lisa McDonald, Executive Director, and Jeff Killeen, Director of Policy and Programs.
Being here today. My colleagues, members of parliament, know the system, but for our witnesses, when I present this yellow card, it means there's 1 minute left, and this red card, it means that time is up. So we can start the first round of questions with Madam. Oh no, sorry about the questions. We first have to hear from the witnesses. Apologies for that. So we'll begin with Mr. Burton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike McPherson, the chair of the committee, has emailed me the 5 points that comprise the committee study on critical minerals understanding order 1082. And this afternoon, I would like to address points 1 and 3. That is, how can we best protect Canada's national security by preventing the sale of critical mineral assets to hostile foreign interests? And the point 3, how Canada can reduce its reliance on and vulnerability to foreign supply chains when it comes to sourcing and processing of critical minerals. I think it's pretty clear that the hostile foreign interests, as has been affirmed by several of the people who have given evidence to this committee earlier, is overwhelmingly the People's Republic of China. I can appreciate the ideal that Canada should be country agnostic in national security threat assessment. But the fact is that the People's Republic of China regime is an integrated party, state, military, security, industrial complex, unlike any other country in the world today. As China's president and the party general secretary and the chairman of the military commission has put it, party, government, military, civilian, and academic, east, west, south, north, and center, the party leads everything. So there are no industrial enterprises in China existing independently from China's party state. If we impose a distinction between China's state enterprises and ostensibly private enterprises, for example, Huawei describes itself as a private enterprise. It does serve China's strategic interest for us to perceive these enterprises private by giving Canada the misimpression that a company like Huawei, for example, as a non-state actor, would not be subject to direction by Chinese military intelligence, as all Chinese enterprises, state or non-state, would be under Chinese law. Chinese business enterprises are all state-related. The serving of the overall interests of the Chinese Communist Party at home and China's geostrategic interests abroad takes priority in these business enterprises, business decisions, over maximizing profits to shareholders or whatever. And so, as earlier witnesses to this study have observed, it's very difficult, well nigh impossible, to distinguish between commercial and geostrategic factors in Chinese regime acquisitions. And, we see evidence of this in Canada. For example, China's acquisition of Nexen and the attempt to purchase Aecon or Shandong Gold's bid for TMAC Enterprises gold mine in Nunavut, all involved bids that are well established to have been well over market value. And why does China pay more than they need to? Why do they pay more than the market rate for things? I think it's because these acquisitions would enable the potential for Chinese state agencies to use them for espionage through privileged access to knowledge of Canadian infrastructure and digital databases. And so these enterprises are heavily subsidized because they serve both a geostrategic and a commercial interest. So, the Huawei software and hardware is priced well below that of its Scandinavian and South Korean competitors, which makes it so attractive to our telecommunication companies who have a mandate to maximize profit to their shareholders. But Canadian telecommunications companies do not have a defined mandate to protect Canada's national security from a foreign threat. Insofar as the critical minerals go, the same principles apply. China does a lot of these Belt and Road development projects in resource-rich countries, such as Angola, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Zambia, for example. The potential for China attaining geostrategic leverage over minerals that are central to high-tech sectors is rightly of very deep concern. We already have the example in 2010 of a dispute over Japan's detention of a Chinese fishing trawler captain. To coerce his release, the Chinese government blocked exports to Japan of a critical category of minerals used in products like hybrid cars, wind turbines, and guided missiles for a period of 2 months in 2010. China denied that they had imposed any embargo on Japan against, great evidence to the contrary, but we know only too well, with our experience of hostage diplomacy and the imposition of unjustified tariff barriers on our canola seeds and meat, violating contractual terms for the Chinese import of those Canadian commodities, that China does apply economic coercion and did so to force our government's hand over an extradition matter.
Mr. Burton, I would have you conclude, please. We're above time.
Okay, I think we cannot rely on China to fulfill its treaty obligations to the WTO, and it's important for us to collaborate with our allies to protect foreign supply chains as increasing tensions occur between China and Russia and the Western Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Je passerai maintenant la parole au professeur.
And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Professor Zagib, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. You pronounced it correctly. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, good afternoon. My experience in critical minerals and their processing into active materials for batteries dates back over 36 years. My team and myself have written several articles, chapters of books, and patents in this area, several of which have been commercially successful. For example, lithium salt, iron phosphate, graphite, titanium oxide. All of these are used today in several battery technologies for electronics, energy storage, and electric vehicles. From June 2020 to December 2021, I was a strategic advisor for Investissement Québec and the Quebec government. Thanks to my international network and my 36 years of experience in lithium-ion batteries, I was able to open doors all over the globe for Investissement Québec and for the Quebec Department of Economy and Innovation, for brokering and accelerating the recognition of the Quebec ecosystem from the mine to recycling, so as to attract international players in minerals, precursors, cathodes and anodes and cells to Quebec. The Quebec government is working on several fronts to create a green circular economy for batteries, emphasizing greenhouse gas traceability, and also a stable and safe supply chain in Canada. There are 2 stages of development from batteries, from the mine to the cell. At the mining level, we're talking about processing the rock into ore. And then this is processed into active materials, for example, cathodes or anodes. In the first stage, we're talking about something that takes several years, over 10 years. To open and operate a mine, The second stage, to produce a material that's already known industrially, takes approximately 2 to 3 years, up until 7 years. And if it's a new material, you're talking about several years.
For the first transformation mining, I suggest to federal government to create committee including the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Industry and Innovation, the Minister of National Resources, and the Minister of Environmental with the First Nation leadership to facilitate, to reduce the time of environmental assessment and the permit requiring the open mining. In particular for critical minerals, of course, we should include the constant monitoring of the audit of environmental impact to this project. This committee should help finance mining projects with multi-billion budget, as these projects are very expensive by their natures. As for the second transformation, I recommend the creation of a special federal funding and program to critical minerals to support the local transformation of the minerals into active material for application. Some critical minerals should be considered as national security element, such rare earth element. For example, one iPhone, we will find 16 or 17 rare element present. In this critical of the country and for the local transformation of critical minerals and to protect them from foreign interest. Canada must also invest to bring back the national industry of microelectronics chips manufactured by using local silicon, which is essential for several electronics components in electric vehicles and batteries. Moreover, the program should be including the funding of research and innovation, universities, college, research institute, and industry. This will be reduce the time of productions and the cost through the technology transfer for local companies, and international company will be established manufacturers in Canada as well, putting Canada for forefront. En outre, je suggère au gouvernement du...
In addition, I suggest that the Canadian government create 3 centres across the country. This will be for industry and mining engineering. The idea being to design machine prototypes for processing ore and minerals with complete technology transfer. To create a new manufacturing industry in Canada. It's a strategic sector. It's a strategic sector which will lead to a lot of glory and reinforce the industrial independence of Canada. It will create a lot of jobs. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Zagreb. And now I turn the floor over to Mr. Fortier. Mr. Fortier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Vice Chairs, and I am the president of companies and organizations that have come together to advance the development of a national zero-emission vehicle supply chain. Our members are private sector companies and organizations from across Canada's zero-emission and electric vehicle ecosystem, from mining companies to battery research and development organizations to parts manufacturers, vehicle assemblers, EV battery recyclers, and EV charging companies. The transition to zero-emission transportation is happening quickly, probably more quickly than most of us ever imagined. Paradoxically, this presents both an enormous opportunity and a threat for Canada. Je vais d'abord parler de la menace.
First, I'll address the threat. A large portion of our economy is based on the success of the auto sector, which accounts for 10% of our GDP in manufacturing and is our second leading export industry. There have been some announcements of assembly mandates for electric vehicles for Southern Ontario, but it is not at all clear that the industry's footprint is going to be as important in the future as it has been over the last 60 years. If Canada does not have a comprehensive strategy to attract and retain electric vehicle manufacturers, long-term commitments of these manufacturers to Canada will remain uncertain.
About the opportunity. This is an opportunity not only to retain our auto sector footprint, but to grow it and to move further up the global value chain. It's an opportunity to develop and execute against a comprehensive EV strategy and to take advantage of Canada's enviable position to be a leader in the entire electric vehicle production chain. As members know, we have the critical and rare earth minerals needed to build the next generations of batteries and motors. We have world-class battery and vehicle R&D. We have parts manufacturers that supply global OEMs. And of course, those OEMs have a history with and investment in Canada. And by virtue of those investments, we have tens of thousands of skilled men and women who work in this industry and who are vested in its success. So the window is open for Canada, but it won't stay open forever. This committee has already heard a lot about the dominance of China in mineral, battery, and EV production, but it's not only China, it's the EU, it's Australia, it's South Korea, and Japan, and the UK, and the United States. Every jurisdiction that believes it can benefit from the world's transition to clean mobility is making a move. They're developing comprehensive EV and battery supply chain strategies and making significant investments. So Canada has an enormous opportunity, but we can't simply assume things will work out. While having parts manufacturing and vehicle assembly capacity will remain critical, it can't be the only part of our auto sector's future, and it certainly doesn't assure our success. Simply put, what got us here is not what's going to get us there. So what will? Canada needs an integrated strategy to ensure that our EV supply chain flourishes here. We need our mining sector to be a part of our auto sector. We need our software and AI sectors to be a part of the auto sector, and we need our financial services sector to be part of our auto sector. This will attract the world's interest and investment, but it won't happen by accident. It needs to be done purposefully and with intent. La bonne nouvelle, c'est que le gouvernement fédéral.
The good news is that the federal government has already begun to focus on this opportunity with its Mines to Mobility report and also with its funding of a Center of Excellence for Critical Minerals. Also, it is looking for direct foreign investment for manufacturing of battery cells. But more has to be done.
A foundational part of this industrial future. The sector requires much more development and investment to ensure Canada's future EV supply chain success. And Accelerate has already been supporting work in this area. We're collaborating with one of our members, Clean Energy Canada, who are leading our joint battery task force, which works in consultation with various industry stakeholders, including parts manufacturers and OEMs, to advance Canada's domestic battery industry. And another one of our members, the Battery Metals Association of Canada, has initiated a study of the opportunities in our critical minerals and metals sector to feed into an integrated and competitive EV supply chain. This work will identify ways in which Canada can maximize critical mineral production and foster production of battery active materials. Reports from these projects are forthcoming and will inform policymakers on the opportunities in the upstream and midstream segments of Canada's EV supply chain.
Suis-je le seul pour qui M. Fortier a gelé?
Am I the only one for whom Mr. Fortier froze? Okay, perhaps we will move on to our next witness, while we wait for the situation to be resolved. Mr. Fortier, you're back. Sorry, you froze for a moment there. Perhaps you could go back maybe 15 to 20 seconds?
Et là, vous êtes en sourdine.
And now you're on mute.
Les joies de...
Oh, the joys.
Voilà, c'est mieux. Merci.
Listen, I think I was talking about some of the work that we're doing. We're working with a couple of our members to really develop Canada's battery sector. For example, with Clean Energy Canada, one of our members, we're leading a joint battery task force that works in consultation with various stakeholders, including OEMs and parts manufacturers, to advance our domestic battery industry. And further upstream, we're working with the Battery Metals Association of Canada and have initiated a study on the opportunities in our critical minerals and metals sector to feed into an integrated EV supply chain. Reports of these projects are forthcoming, and they'll inform policymakers such as yourselves on the opportunities in the upstream and midstream segments of Canada's EV supply chain. I'll pause there, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fortier. We'll now move to Mr. Daniel Breton, PDG de Mobilité électrique Canada. Monsieur Breton.
Mr. Breton, President and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the members of the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology for taking the time to study our recommendations for the supply and processing of critical and essential minerals. I'm Daniel Breton, President and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. Our members include manufacturers of light, medium, heavy, and off-road vehicles, providers of electricity and charging infrastructure, mining companies, technology companies, research centers, municipalities, universities, fleet managers, unions, NGO, environmental NGOs, etc. We are one of the leading organizations in the world in transport electors.
He fully supported the Canadian and U.S. government's agreement on the importance of the development of a zero-emission vehicle future and the battery strategy at the first bilateral meeting held virtually with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and USA President Joe Biden and their senior teams. As noted in their official statement, the leaders agreed to work together to build the necessary supply chain to make Canada and the US global leaders in all aspects of battery development and production. To that end, the leaders agreed to strengthen the Canada-US Critical Mineral Action Plan to target a net zero industrial transformation, batteries for zero-emission vehicles, and renewable energy storage. Although Canada is not yet a critical mineral superpower, the potential is clearly there with 31 critical minerals identified in Canada, experienced research teams such as Jeff Dunn and Karim Zaib, and a qualified workforce. According to Natural Resources Canada, rare earth elements are used in many industrial applications including electronics, energy, aerospace, automotive for EVs, and defense. The largest use of rare earths is in permanent magnets that are a component of our cell phones, televisions, computers, automobiles, etc. The second largest use of rare earths is in petroleum cracking catalysts. In 2020, 90% of rare earths used for these products were produced and used in China. For strategic reasons, China rationed its exports of rare earths in 2013. According to a 2020 report from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, China controls 80% of the refining of critical minerals such as rare earth element material and other critical minerals, 77% of the world's battery cell manufacturing capacity. Having control does not necessarily having the mines in one's own country, but having invested in the mines of other countries as well. It has to be said that China has been far-sighted in its long-term investments. In 2021, Chinese companies produced more than 40% of the world's EV batteries. South Korea produced more than 30% of them, and Japan close to 15%. But the situation is evolving rapidly. For example, the European Battery Alliance was launched on October 17th to create a competitive and sustainable battery cell manufacturing value chain in Europe. That's why, as identified in our 2030 EV Action Plan, EMC recommends that the federal government focus its effort on attracting more investment to accelerate EV manufacturing and related industries in Canada, including assembly, parts, machinery, charging equipment, and battery materials extraction and processing, with a Canadian EV economic development and investment attraction strategy. Second, accelerate technologies, research, development, and manufacturing associated with reducing the cost of vehicle batteries and thus vehicle cost per unit of range. Achieving economies of scale in vehicle, battery, and charging infrastructure production will also help to reduce costs for consumers and fleets in Canada. Three, working with the U.S. administration to ensure that any Buy America policies reflect the North American auto market and do not negatively impact Canadian EV businesses and suppliers. Four, helping Canadian EV battery recycling companies through financial incentives and regulatory framework that will support innovation. And five, supporting the Accelerate Alliance, my friend Matt and his group, Canada's Zero Emission Vehicle Supply Chain Alliance, to help key players in the country develop a thriving EV industry. La raison pour laquelle nous devons encourager
It is imperative that we develop our own supply chain for zero-emission vehicles, from mining to mobility. And it is because we must ensure that Canada is not left by the wayside in the revolution of electric vehicles, which is currently taking place. For economic, environmental, geopolitical, as Mr. Burton said, and national security reasons, Canada can and must develop a critical mineral strategy to ensure appropriate supply for the Canadian EV industry and not simply send our critical minerals abroad where high value-added jobs will be created. We want to create them here. Otherwise, we'll be missing out on a historic opportunity which only occurs once in a generation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. And now I turn the floor over to the Canadian Association of Prospectors and Developers. Ms. McDonald.
It'll actually be myself addressing the committee today.
No worries. The floor is yours, Mr. Killian.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I want to firstly acknowledge that I come to you from the traditional lands of the Huron, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat and Oneida peoples, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, and all the Indigenous First Nations that have lived on these lands over the centuries. My name, as you mentioned, is Jeff Killeen. I'm the Policy and Program Director for the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. And thank you for inviting me to appear today on behalf of Canada's mineral exploration industry. As you know, I hope you know, PDAC does represent thousands of members, both corporations and individuals that work in mineral exploration and mining in Canada and around the world. PDAC operates through a committee structure. Industry professionals and stakeholders with real on-the-ground experience in industry collaborate to inform our recommendations and bring points of advocacy and to form the points of advocacy that we bring to governments. In recent years, PDAC is engaged with the government in developing the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan, Canada's critical minerals list, and in efforts to improve the efficiency of targeted programs and incentives that can accelerate critical mineral discoveries within Canadian borders. We are certainly encouraged to see the Government of Canada recognize our potential to become a supplier of choice for the minerals needed to transition to a low carbon future, and we support a number of the commitments noted in the Prime Minister's recent mandate letters to Cabinet. We share this committee's enthusiasm towards critical minerals, and I offer recommendations that aim to both spur exploration for critical minerals in Canada and bolster our capabilities to conduct science and evidence-based processes for infrastructure and development, land management, and conservation decision-making. From previous testimony, I do understand this committee has had some questions of the efficacy of the Mineral Exploration Tax Credit, or METC, which combines with flow-through shares to incentivize early-stage mineral exploration within Canadian borders. I can tell you definitively that this mechanism is a foundational reason why Canadian mineral exploration companies and projects attract more capital than any other country. In 2021 alone, flow-through and the METC were the source of more than $1 billion of investment into Canadian projects. The impact of this economic activity is magnified in rural and remote regions of the country where our sector typically operates and places the mineral industry in a unique position to help accelerate economic recovery in parts of Canada where few alternatives exist. Now, while record high gold prices and base metals prices trending higher has boosted exploration activity in Canada over the last 2 to 3 years, the amount of exploration spending directed towards critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, graphite, or rare earths represents less than 3% of domestic activity in 2021, and that's based on Enercan estimates. So for Canada to be successful in efficiently transitioning to a low carbon future and becoming a supplier of choice for the minerals and metals needed by the world to effect such a change, we must increase our inventory of economic and socially viable critical mineral deposits here in Canada. That's why PDAC has called for an expansion of the Mineral Exploration Tax Credit. This is to help spur grassroots exploration activity in Canada, and we support the call by government to double the METC for critical minerals exploration. We're certainly keen to offer ways to implement and administer this expansion effectively. And furthermore, we recommend permanent adoption of the METC incentive rather than letting that incentive expire as currently set in 2024. A permanent adoption, we feel, is essential in order to provide the long-term certainty for investors and that competitive advantage to generate viable critical mineral discoveries here in Canada. This step is crucial, particularly given the low odds of exploration success. Typically, only 1 in 10,000 prospects turn into a mine, and there's a decade, as mentioned, or sometimes multi-decade path that a project will undergo from a first discovery to operating mine. We also support the government's call for the use of science and evidence-based decision-making. This dovetails directly with our recommendation to increase public geoscience funding and establish a mechanism to assist provinces and territories to undertake comprehensive mineral assessment models. This is evidence that's necessary to inform decision-making in future infrastructure development, in energy production, conservation, and advancing Indigenous reconciliation, both at the regional and national levels. Enhancing our geoscientific knowledge base will support effective policy development. It'll attract stable industry investment and drive long-term exploration and the infrastructure required to fill the upstream gaps that currently exist in Canada's mineral supply chain. So these are the necessary steps to identify future domestic sources of critical minerals, expand our processing capacity to reduce our reliance on foreign sources, and capture more valued activities in Canada in the Canadian economy. So these strategic choices can also ensure that Canada has a greater self-determination in our future carbon footprint and our capability to export sustainable practices and minerals to the rest of the world. So thank you very much for your consideration and time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Killeen. We will now move to our first round of questions with MP Tracy Gray. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd first like to go to Dr. Burton from Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And I know that you were sort of in the middle of making a comment regarding the Chinese regime's economic coercion. So I'm wondering if you can just finish your thoughts on that, and then I have some questions for you.
Well, I think that, my message really is that there is a lot of urgency here. I read the statement by Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi after their bilateral meeting at the Olympics, and clearly, they're getting much closer together and much more interested in creating the lines of what could be an intensified sort of Cold War dynamic. So the idea that China could use its control of critical minerals to coerce nations is something that I think is pretty much a no-brainer. In other words, they're going to do it if they can, because this is part of their modus operandi to expand their influence in the world and their overall plan to displace the United States as the dominant global power by 2050, as articulated by Mr. Xi. So, I know that, for example, Australia sends a lot of its lithium, or most of its lithium production, to China for processing. I think we really have to get together with our allies and try and figure out ways to establish supply chains that will not be running through countries with whom we may have very hostile relations in the future, and who may use their control of critical minerals to further their geostrategic purposes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And so on that note, with this debt trap diplomacy, what actions do you think the Canadian government should be taking right now so that we're not put in a position where we're stuck in a place when it comes to critical mineral access?
Well, this is a question that really can't be resolved by Canada alone. And certainly the Chinese use of their Belt and Road Initiative, which does involve, facilitating corruption and bribery of autocratic dictators in third world countries that have something that is in China's interest, particularly mineral resources, is something that we want to challenge, to provide alternative streams for development funding to those nations. But up to now, the global community, or the like-minded nations, have been unable to successfully coordinate, largely due to differences among ourselves. The French and the Germans are not happy about coordinating in an alliance to contain China's malign activities internationally with the Americans. And the result is that we haven't seen the allocation of funding or the coordination necessary to try and protect the international rules-based order against China's malign activities, including, this stuff like hostage diplomacy and unjustified imposition of tariff barriers to try and engage in economic coercion of nations to comply with China's political agendas in their countries.
Okay, thank you. Now we know that that in Canada, the government says that they're working on a critical mineral strategy. Are you satisfied with the speed of this strategy being developed? And what is Canada losing out on right now while we still don't have a strategy?
I'm definitely very concerned about our lack of effective action on this. I was completely flummoxed when we had an opportunity to stop a Chinese acquisition of a Canadian control mine in Argentina. And I really think that a lot of this seems to have to do with persons who are involved in the policy process who may have a conflict of interest because they are the recipients of benefits from a foreign regime. I'd really like to see us follow through with a Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme Act like Australia, or a Foreign Agents Registry Act, just so that people who are in this conflict of interest will have to declare it, and that could clear up some, mysterious decisions by government that seem to favor the Chinese regime, which I believe act against the overall interests of Canada and the international rules-based order.
Okay, thank you. And I guess to add on to that, under the Investment Canada Act, should takeovers of Canadian companies by foreign state-owned enterprises be subject to more stringent review than what is currently undertaken?
Absolutely. And as I said in my presentation, I think that when you look at Chinese enterprises, they're all under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. They all have Chinese Communist Party branches at the top of their, hierarchical structure, and it's the party secretary who coordinates their activities at the direction of Beijing, if Beijing wants to see that. And so I think that we should be going down to zero in terms of assessing the value of these investments if it does involve anything out of China or other state.
Okay, and based on the
Actors.
regime's previous actions, is there potential that Canada could be shut off from some of these critical mineral supply chains, in your views?
I think it's almost certainly that China would do that if they wanted to get something from Canada, such as more access to our high tech or greater capacity for the Chinese state to invest in Canadian mining and other critical infrastructure.
And where in the strategic mineral supply chain do you see Canada as being the weakest right now?
Well, that's not really a question that I have the expertise to answer. I think there are a lot of people here who have more, but I mean, obviously we should be pulling the stuff out of the ground ourselves and processing it here. I mean, experts may have a better take on that than me, but that just strikes me as a no-brainer in terms of maintaining the integrity of our ability to avoid being subject to coercion by autocratic states who might have these things that we need for our development and would be prepared to, as they did with Japan in 2010, as I say, withdraw them to coerce us to give concessions in other areas.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Madame Gray, this is all the time we have. We'll move now to Madame Lapointe for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
For the members here from PDAC. And I'd like to ask you about domestic supply chains. So is Canada ready to not only mine the critical minerals and metals needed to shift to a zero emissions economy, but to also develop the raw materials into the products needed for electric vehicle batteries and other products? And I'm looking at this from an A to Z perspective, from mine to production to infrastructure and technology along that domestic supply chain. Where are we at in Canada on that front?
Well, if I may, I would start by suggesting that the Canadian mining and mineral exploration industry is almost unparalleled in terms of its quality, its capabilities, and the best practices that this industry brings both to its practices in Canada and abroad. So when we think about what is Canada's capability to discover more metals within our minerals and metals within our own borders and bring those metals to market, I think it's almost unequaled compared to any other country. Our ecosystem is very robust from the exploration end of things all the way through to mineral processing. Now, when we think of where are the shortfalls in our mind at PDAC, certainly we think of our members largely being the junior exploration and developers within Canada, and we think about what can be pulled out of the ground, as you pointed to. So I think our recommendations are centered around this concept that we need to build up a larger inventory of known resources and reserves within Canada. It would be in our best interest to be able to understand where those are located for quality infrastructure decisions to be able to be made so that we can understand what our energy balance will be in the future and ensure that we can actually access those prospective lands with social license to operate well in mind. So that's really where our mind is focused at this point, is just to build up that resource capacity within Canada. And with that in mind, the lion's share of what we've seen over many years with respect to exploration in Canada has been focused on precious metals, it's been focused on more traditional base metals, and the amount of attention spent on, as this committee has considered before, lithium or different types of lithium species or graphite or cobalt or other metals, it's been relatively immaterial in Canada for the last foreseeable history or history in our past. So I think what I can say is we are the second largest country in terms of geography on Earth. We have every geological terrain and potential for discovery in virtually every region in this country for rare earths, for lithium, for cobalt, and the things that this committee is talking about and considering. So there's, I would say, unparalleled exploration upside and vast exploration potential here in Canada that we need to maximize to ensure that all of those downstream issues that we may be considering are put in focus as opposed to the upstream portions that are maybe lacking right now.
Okay, so on that, so between the different levels of government and the private sector, what is it that needs to be implemented or changed to ensure that we are expanding and maintaining that supply chain?
It's a great question. And I think, again, I'll come back to our recommendations, and for good reason. I think knowledge is key. And I believe what we've seen in recent mandate letters around a reliance on evidence, science and evidence-based decision-making is the right one to do. With that in mind, I think there is information we still need to have in hand to be able to make quality decisions that are thinking 10 and 20 years down the road, has been indicated by some of the other panelists here today. And so public geoscience is very important in terms of its value to the Canadian public. We also see the government starting to take steps like forming a pan-Canadian geoscience strategy. These are the types of interactions between the federal and provincial governments, all the way down to municipal governments, that needs to be taken into consideration. So when we think about access to land, when we think about energy demands, again, when we think about the impacts on potential local communities, these are thought well in advance, so that we're not having to make decisions in short term and put us behind our competitors with respect to participating in these opportunities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Killing.
Thank you.
J'ai une question pour Dr. Karim Zagbi.
I have a question for Dr. Karim Zagbi. Given your 36 years of experience, when it comes to research and development in the transition to applications and the rechargeable batteries need for EVs, is there anything that can be done? Is this something that can be done everywhere in Canada? Are there regional challenges? Are there infrastructure challenges or even weather challenges which would cause electric vehicles to not be used everywhere?
Okay, very quick. Canada a la technologie.
Canada has the technology to develop the mine and do the first processing up until the active materials to the cell to the module. And this was developed as of the 70s. Hydro-Quebec, Molly Energy, Jeff Dan. An example today. If you see the Tesla, the NM6 was developed by Jeff Dan, and the LP was developed by Hydro-Quebec and its partners. So the technology was born in Canada, and we have the human capital. We've got everything. There's no problem about a car not being able to work in low temperatures. We are capable of finding solutions thanks to the human capital, thanks to the very good Canadian universities we have, and thanks to our institutions and the ecosystem we have here in Canada. Thank you. Thank you, Madame Lapointe and Professor Zagib. And now I turn the floor over to Mr. Lemieux. 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to tell Ms. McDonald and Mr. Kilm that, as you know, I was part of the last two meetings of your association, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was able to be at the meeting in June, but wasn't able to be in March. I have a question. What about the urgency of passing legislation now to be able to keep a proper pace and develop the industry and have forecastability? Do we have to have a Minister of the Environment accelerate the pace right away? Do we need some sort of zero-emission vehicle bill regarding sales of electric vehicles and support? Does this have any impact on the market if you have a state legislating improved access to electric vehicles for citizens versus the availability of these cars? Well, the way things are becoming deployed over the world is that the main markets of selling EVs are regulated. And so in Canada, we don't have any regulation, and it's so in the last quarter of 2021, we saw 100% electric vehicles or hybrid chargeable vehicles sold. And if you look in November and December in Europe or China, 20%, in Germany, over 30%, Norway, 90%. So clearly a zero-emission federal legislation would pick up the pace of electric vehicle sales, because right now the car manufacturers are sending their EVs to the markets that are better regulated, and they're working with incentives, whether it's for infrastructure implementation, whether it's for production of EVs, whether it's for purchase rebates or other campaigns. So to get back to Ms. Lapointe's question, you were asking whether there are places in Canada where you won't be able to travel by EV. Last week, I left the Quebec countryside and went to Toronto by EV with 4 people on board, and everything went well. It was 20 below zero. People tend to think that an electric vehicle in Canada is an issue. Not really. But, you know, Norway is the leading country in the world for EVs, and it's not exactly a tropical country. So there are ways to increase the transportation efficiency in all of Canada. In northern regions, electricity generation is off-grid, and that's more complicated. So we're working on it with people such as Karim Zaid for energy storage. But you can get anywhere in Canada with a heavy or regular vehicle that's electric. I could bear testimony to this because I own an electric car myself. But I think we have to increase the offer, especially to go through Parc de la Vendée. There are not many charging stations. So from 2017 to now, there have been several meetings between Canada and the U.S., initially dealing with critical minerals and oil sands, and also the Build Back Better Act to defend the electric vehicle industry, especially in Ontario, and everything that needs to be done. And the minister sent a letter to Washington. It seems to be lengthy and fastidious when dealing with the Americans. What are your fears right now? Well, if you want to talk about Build Back Better, there's a side of it which is worrisome for the Canadian auto industry, because essentially the reason we're here talking about critical minerals is to ensure that not only do we have an electric vehicle, an electric truck, electric bus industry, and even electric snowmobile industry can be developed here in Canada, but also to ensure that the transition take place without losing jobs. We want to fight climate change. We want to fight pollution. We want to be able to create jobs at the same time. So right now, our fear with the Build Back Better plan is that with individual discounts being offered for vehicles sold in these states that are manufactured in the U.S. would impact on the manufacture of similar vehicles in Canada. And given that we're so integrated with the U.S. here, we think it goes against the supposed will of collaboration between the two countries. And that we've heard about and read about in February 2021, where President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau signed a collaboration agreement for batteries and critical minerals. So it would really be a loss. It would be a mistake to say we're going to send the U.S. our raw materials and then the value-added jobs are going to go there. This is a model that we did too often with our oil, with our wood, with our aluminum, with our electricity. We want quality jobs here in Canada, from the mine to mobility. I think all witnesses are of the opinion that there are issues in terms of raw material supply. Do you believe that the committee should invite the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources so that we can understand the leadership and timeframes regarding the Canada-U.S. Critical Minerals Group? I think that would be a good idea. As several people are talking about it here, and what's happening in terms of critical minerals when you say that Canada is lagging behind the rest of the planet. It's not that Canada is lagging behind the planet. It's that most Western countries are behind China, and now we have to catch up for economic reasons, but also for geopolitical reasons, as Mr. Burton so eloquently stated, including. Do you see any concerns in federal-provincial relations in this dynamic between Quebec, Ontario, and the federal government? Is there a context to act now? What is the window of opportunity? How can this be done while respecting the provinces? Well, listen, the window is very short. The Europeans woke up earlier and have developed an ecosystem. We can't start talking about this for 5 or 10 years. People will have been too far ahead of us, and Canada will lose out completely on this opportunity. Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Breton, now over to Moss, MP Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't help feel that I'm part of the fiddling that's going on as Rome is burning. Right now, about 2 kilometers away from me, we actually have a blockage at the Ambassador Bridge that is the lifeline for this country for the auto industry. And I have MPs that have been encouraging some of this activity that I'm working with. And at the same time, we're discussing about how we can actually rescue investment for the electric vehicles. And the Stellantis plant, which produces the Windsor Pacifica, which is an electric vehicle, is currently shut down right now because of that activity. And I still can't get any help, including the Minister of Transport, who claims that it's a municipal issue to connect the roadway to the international crossing 17 kilometers away to the 401 system. And the mayor is doing an injunction right now as I speak to actually deal with this. So we have right now the only electrical vehicle production in our country shut down because of this. So if we even create more battery plants, if we create more investment in this industry, if we actually take, as Mr. Breton has proposed, some of these really good ideas about even how we actually use transferable technology to other types of industries, it's all for naught, because even just yesterday, the president and CEO of Stellantis was in Windsor to help decide about the new future, because the Pacifica needs a new product in that area later on. That's probably the most successful manufacturing plant since the Second World War. It's run until just recently on 3 shifts. I have Ford right now that actually is airlifting products and airlifting pieces to their engine plants here in desperation, and those workers are done. And then down on the border where we have these people that have come, most of them aren't from the neighborhood, adjacent to it, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry I'm going on as I do this, but I'm using my opportunity as an MP to emphasize this, is one of the most impoverished areas in Canada. It's called Sandwich Town. And that area right now is losing not only its quality of life, but on top of that, already has people that are unemployed and also have students and others that have been disenfranchised, ironically, the full victims of what's taking place. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm hoping that we can take advantage of this, and I will propose at least a question to Mr. Breton real quickly. Through my time is evaporating through my obvious frustration as to what's taking place here, but I still do see hope and opportunity for this, and would ask him, you know, with our universities and with our assets outside of the current problems that I'm faced right now, can we turn this around and also use, as he's noted, snowmobiles and other types of electric vehicle stuff, so it's not just the car industry, as a wedge for us to be different and also be prosperous in our future. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the indulgence to the members that are on this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Massé, for this question. Yes, we absolutely can. The time is pressing. I don't know if you remember back in 2009, when we had the financial crisis, there was an opportunity there to develop EV research and development like the US did. We did not do that in 2009. Now is our second and last chance. So we have amazing companies in Canada developing electric cars, developing electric buses, school buses, electric trucks, electric snowmobiles. I've mentioned to you in the past Lion Electric, based in Saint-Jérôme, who has 300 suppliers in Canada only. So companies like that, you know, can be spearheading the transition towards electric mobility. And if we don't do that now, if we don't accelerate the transition, what will happen is a few years from now, all we will do is import technologies, batteries, and vehicles coming from abroad. So that's why it is pressing. That's why we have to act on it now.
Well, and you know, aside my current situation, it's actually really exciting. And to Mr. Burton, I know that you mentioned about a rules-based order with regards to the United States, and obviously that's kind of ironic with what's taking place now in my constituency. But I am hopeful. Can we work with our current trade agreements context to actually, you know, smooth out some of these things, to have like a North America trading bloc that's effective between Mexico, Canada, the United States, that's beneficial for us to push back against some of the Eastern imports that we are getting from not only just Europe, but also to go back to Asia. Can you comment on that, please? And thank you, Mr. Chair. I know my time is up.
Well, I think that, you know, we certainly want to have our own capacity to be independent of other nations, including the United States. But what's most important is that the supply chains be implemented among like-minded countries that respect the rules and spirit of the WTO and the International Rules-Based Order, and will not arbitrarily cancel contracts when there's a political dispute, or, you know, if Canada started to crack down on Chinese state espionage or harassment of people in Canada, you know, would then try and menace us on some sort of flimsy pretext, not allowing us to get things that we desperately need because China is the only viable source for those components. So, you know, I do think we should tighten up with our allies and be conscious that we need to have reliable supply chains that will not be subject to disruption, interference for countries that have political reasons for doing that, geostrategic and political reasons.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Monsieur Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Massé, Mr. Burton. And now the floor is over to Mr. Généreux, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Mr. Burton,
I can see. How big was that error from the government?
I'm sorry, I haven't heard the question.
The neolithium, the sale of the Chinese government, to the enterprise in India and in China, was an error, as I can feel from your point of view. How big that error was?
Well, I think that, in general, when we have, for example, when there was a reversal of a cabinet decision with regard to the sale of technology from a Montreal company that was applicable to directed energy weaponry, or when we decided to decided to allow China to acquire a satellite company that had satellites that were used by the Pentagon and the government of Taiwan. I really wonder who has been convincing our government that these things are a good idea. So when the matter of neolithium came up, I just saw it as one of a sequence of decisions made at the most senior levels of government, which mystify me because they don't seem to be serving the Canadian interest and seem to be allowing China to consolidate greater and greater control over geostrategic matters and military matters, which could, in years to come back to haunt us very badly.
Okay, merci. Monsieur Breton.
Thank you. Mr. Breton, I imagine that neolithium bothered you when you saw that transaction? All of the rare earth products, or all the products necessary to manufacture batteries, when you see Canada or Canadians selling their mines wherever they are in the world, I wonder that doesn't make you very happy. Well, what I was saying earlier is that I think that most Western countries did not see the speed of this transition to renewable energy and critical minerals coming, not as fast as it came. So for geostrategic and military reasons, we need critical minerals, and we need rare earth materials. And I think that Pentagon pointed this out a few years ago. So I believe that Canada did not act quickly enough. The U.S. did the same. In recent years, certain countries have let China buy mines all over the world. Mines were closed down because they were said, critical minerals markets aren't there yet. But that has long-term implications. China really was ahead of the rest of the planet on this one. And now everybody is waking up. And it's a very hard awakening. But we have to wake up because things are really serious. Mr. Zahid. Thank you, Mr. Breton. Mr. Zahid, you talked about 3 centers of excellence to potentially be set up in Canada. Do you have any idea where these centers would be? And what time frame should they be set up? I don't see you. I hope you're still there. Yes, I'm there. I hear you. I call these centers because, let's say, to make graphite, you need the furnace, you need processing. The machining is done in Japan, China. And then to verify the graphite, it's in Japan or in China or in Korea. To purify of all these materials, we have gotten rid of our industrialization. It's very, very important to bring the industry back from silicium and to have any mining machinery. I would talk about this. I'm talking about something very specific. To collaborate with industry. So to have these centers, I said maybe one in Quebec, one in the middle of Canada, and one at the other end of the country so that we could work together with the universities. It's very important that industrialization and our machines for mining, for anodes and cathodes, and batteries, all be made here in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Fautier. You were talking about a threat because 6% of our GDP comes from the auto sector. When you talked about our opportunities, I understand that there are opportunities in Canada. What is the time frame to implement the kind of industry that Mr. Zahib and Breton are talking about? Very quick answer, please, Mr. Fortier. You're on mute. Thank you. As Mr. Breton said, other countries are way ahead of Canada. It's going to take some time. I think our prospector development meeting said it would take 5, 7, 10 years to open mines. Yes, it'll take time, but we have a lot of benefits here. We have an auto industry in Canada. We have the human resources. We have the natural resources. So we do have the opportunity in Canada, but it's going to take some time, yes. Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Mr. Généreux, now over to Mr. Gaillard.
Thank you, Chair. So my questions are for Mr. Fortier. So we've heard testimony that may suggest that Canada is perhaps falling behind in the critical minerals race. I'd like to ask, how far along is Canada as compared with other Western nations specifically?
Sure, that's a great question. So, and we've talked about that a little bit already today. China obviously was well ahead of the rest of the world, and a lot of Asia has been able to catch up with China, and I think the rest of the world, including Canada, is playing catch up. So the good news for Canada is we have these critical minerals. We're one of the very few countries that has most of these minerals, one of the very few countries in the Western Hemisphere, and as we've heard today too, we've got one of the best mining sectors in the world. So this is a possibility for Canada. So can we get these things out of the ground and get them into the products that the world needs? Absolutely we can. There's a lot of work to do. We also need to process these things. We need to have a processing industry that can ensure that the minerals and metals that are mined are processed and then are put into batteries and other important products for the transition that's to come. So we are playing catch up, but the rest of the world's playing catch up too. I mean, it's a reality. But I think one of my counterparts on this panel sort of said, look, Europe has been really focused on this. Australia has been focused on this as well. They both have terrific battery strategies, and the U.S., as we all know, is playing offense now as well.
Yep. So thank you. I think that partly answers my next question as well. But are there other Western nations that have the right mix to get this right in terms of the critical mineral resources, the R&D, the skilled workforce? Like, who are our competitors?
Yeah. So look, the EU has developed a really interesting battery strategy, as has Australia. Here's the really interesting thing for me. Canada has got the opportunity to have a battery strategy. We have an opportunity to have a zero emission vehicle strategy because we have an auto sector here that, is decades old, and we've got thousands of people who know how to put these things together and know how to design really advanced auto parts. We've got, an AI and a technology sector in Canada. We're one of the very few jurisdictions in the world that can do all of this. The question is, are we willing to do it? Are we willing to make the investments to do it? Are we willing to put political capital into this as well? I think we can. I think we should. This is part of Canada's industrial future. So it's not just minerals. It's not just batteries. It's heavy industry. It's advanced manufacturing. It's battery recycling. We are world leaders in a lot of this. So let's put it together. And I think, frankly, Canada has a great opportunity to do that.
Great. So for lithium in specific, in particular, what are the critical next steps that we need to get the supply chain right? Is it the mines? Is it the roads to the mines? Is it the facilities to turn the lithium into something else? Sort of what's the next step?
Yeah, so it's all of that, right? So it is infrastructure, it is the mines, it's the processing, and it's the R&D as well. And I know there are others on this panel who have got sort of deeper expertise in the actual mining part of this. But you've identified the key components that need to be invested in. I think the reality that we're experiencing is it needs to be invested in.
So I think you cut out the last bit.
Oui, je pense que c'est figé peut-être, Mr. Guy.
I think that you've frozen.
We've lost.
Sorry, am I frozen or is Mr. Fortier frozen?
I think it's me. It said my internet was unstable, so I'm back though. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear the last question.
Sorry, we just missed the ending of your answers.
Oh, listen, I was just saying that it's everything you've highlighted. It is the infrastructure. It is, development of new mines and new technologies as well, right? And so, you look at Alberta, there's a lot of interest in looking at sort of oil wells and sort of, working with the brines to extract lithium. And, there's an opportunity for not just traditional mining here. And I think the interesting thing for me is that there's an opportunity across Canada. You know, the auto sector doesn't have to just be Southern Ontario. That's an incredibly important part of the future of our auto sector, but it can be British Columbia, it can be Alberta, it can be Saskatchewan, Quebec, obviously, in the Maritime. So it's an exciting time, but you know, we do need to knit this stuff together.
What are the trade obligations with COSMA? I wonder how that plays into this.
In terms of just auto parts in general?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, there may be people who are better placed than me to talk about the trade elements of this, to be honest. But obviously, you know, we have a trade deal with the U.S. that allows for Canadian content in vehicles, you know, but the vehicles are changing, right? And so what, you know, these trade deals are predicated on technologies when they're signed, and so, you know, the car of the future, the automobile vehicle of the future is not reflected in trade deals today.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to MP Sébastien Lemire for 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Fortier.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Fortier, I'm not giving you a minute to catch your breath. Most car manufacturers have committed to building EVs, or at least an EV component in their cars. But the stock market doesn't seem to think that they'll be able to keep their promises, largely because of the supply chain issues and dependence on China or others for essential minerals or other based materials. So, you know, everybody's talking about moving to EVs. And you talked about committing to a Canadian supply chain. Tell us how important it is to have an independent and sufficient domestic market. Yes, thank you. I think this demonstrates that people need more, the world needs more capacity, more critical minerals, and processing, not just in Canada. But Canada needs a strategy and a supply chain, and they have to be integrated and functional. And this in terms of a North American context, to be able to put more vehicles in the marketplace. Where Canada can really stand out is in the way these minerals are developed. Our mines are among the cleanest in the world, and we have one of the cleanest sources of energy in the world for mining extraction. Is it too late? Concretely, what has to happen for Canada to become an important player in the supply chain in North America and the world? I didn't hear the question. Is it too late to act? And what has to happen concretely for Canada and Quebec to become important components of North American and world supply chains? No, it's not too late. We've heard that other countries are ahead of us, but it's not too late for Canada. But we have to work together. We have to work with the provinces and the federal government to be able to identify opportunities in the mining sector, as well as in the mobile sector, in the manufacturing sector, and making the necessary investments. It's not too late. It's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of investment, yes, but it can be done as a country. It's ambitious, but we need to do it because it represents the future of industry in our country. In closing, can you tell me about the importance of having these cells made close to the resource? Is that an issue for you? Sorry, my internet is cutting out. I'm talking about having be near the resource. You're talking about, is it important for us? Yes, of course. It's one of the main issues in this project, to explore and use the mining sector. It's, of course, a benefit to Canada. And we heard today that Canada has a very advanced sector, more advanced than most other countries in the world. So the issue is, can we exploit our natural resources for this project so that Canada can be a leader in the EV sector? We can do it, but as I said, it's going to take investment, a lot of investment, and a lot of effort and hard work. Thank you, Mr. Fortier. Before turning the floor over to Mr. Massé, Mr. Lemieux, please be careful. Perhaps speak a little more softly and slowly. You're speaking very, very quickly, and for the interpreters, it's very difficult. And for Mr. Fortier's connection, it seems to be even too fast for him to be able to catch. So please slow down. Thank you. And now I turn the floor over to Mr. Massé for 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Est-ce que le député Massé...
Is the member with us? I don't see him on the screen. He told me that he had some connection problems, so we'll skip him and come back to him later. Over to Member Cram.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for joining us today. My questions will mostly be for Jeff Killeen and Lisa McDonald of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. So the mining sector is extremely important to my home province of Saskatchewan. There is broad public support for the mining sector. There is considerably less public support for the government's Bill C-69 brought in a few years ago. The Saskatchewan Mining Association has said that a majority of its members did not support the extra regulatory processes brought in by Bill C-69. So I'd be curious to hear, how do the member organizations of PDAC feel about the additional regulations brought in a few years ago by Bill C-69?
Thank you very much for that question. And in thinking of who our membership predominantly represents, we typically have junior mineral exploration, somewhat up to development companies as the primary component of our cohort at PDAC. And so the impacts of what has happened over the last number of years from development and implementation of the Environmental Assessment Act, I think are still not fully understood. I don't believe there's been enough of a case history from projects that have gone through that process to understand what impacts it may have on future project development. But I would certainly comment on just the pace of permitting, of land access, and the ability to bring new products to market is certainly a concern that we do have. Ability for our members to be able to access prospective lands and conduct work on a consistent basis, and being able to have that clarity for their investors and their stakeholders is still a bit of a challenge in parts of Canada, whether that's as a result of federal legislation, provincial legislation, or the interaction of those two. There are a number of different reasons why, but I think it goes back to some of the recommendations we've made, and at the heart of our recommendation around public geoscience and trying to increase the support for provinces, municipalities, and regions to be able to understand what's underneath them. Because it's only through that sort of function that there can be like minds brought together, that forethought can be put towards where are we going to need energy, where are we going to need to develop roads, and where can we actually have economic development and do it with an engaged and collaborative way. So I really come back to that concept that public geoscience and the funding around that is super important. As I say, with respect to the Environmental Assessment Act, I think it was well thought out to a degree. We certainly, as an association, worked in collaboration with the Mining Association of Canada to provide feedback through its development, and as I say, we'll continue to engage with government as companies go through that process to understand where the challenges may exist.
Has, quote, assessed only through the robust provincial environmental assessment process in Saskatchewan, unquote. And so does PDAC agree with this position for Saskatchewan and for the other provinces as well, that the assessment process should be limited to provincial governments?
I think we do understand quite clearly that resources are predominantly within the purview of the provincial governments, and it's really up to the provinces to define what they think is appropriate within those regions for whether it's an economic development and related to mineral exploration or otherwise. With respect to issues of broader national concern, I think we do respect the fact that the federal government does have purview in those issues, and in such a case where a mineral project may reach that type of importance, then there may be veracity around taking those additional steps. But we certainly do, by and large, agree with the idea that the provinces do understand their resources quite well, and they're able to administer the regulations around this industry as best possible.
All right, and very quickly, because I see I'm almost out of time. 3 years ago, PDAC made a submission to the Senate Committee on Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources about Bill C-69 and indicated that the numerous costly studies more early in the process would be a significant burden. Is that still the position and the experience of PDAC?
I would say definitively, we're certainly focused on a social license to operate as an industry, as us as an association, and how we can assist our members in being able to get to that point with their projects and asset development. And so when we consider where we are today in 2022 with respect to generating that social license to operate, it often means that companies and proponents will have to consider additional steps, and rightfully so, in order to ensure that the ideas and the concepts that they're hoping to bring to their projects are well understood. So with that in mind, I certainly appreciate where companies today are going above and beyond what is often the regulatory framework and what is required of them in terms of being able to engage with their stakeholders and ensure that the public understands their projects, being able to ensure that their investors understand their intent. So, I think at PDAC, we're certainly thinking more so about what should companies do to grasp and maintain that social license to operate, and often that angles activities well above the requirements from a regulatory process.
Thank you, Mr. Killeen. We'll move to Mr. Dung for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't know if MP Massey has come back yet, but I do want to be on record to say that I will convey his message to the government, and at the same time, I admire his effort to voice on behalf of his constituency, and certainly I took notes, using every opportunity to speak up on behalf of his constituent and local businesses. So, with that, I just want to make an observation. 20 years ago in China, the traditional combustion engine vehicle industry just started. They were a very small player, and very quickly they realized that they can't play catch up. So they found a very niche area at the time, we think, to strategically invest in purchasing mines and whatnot, and looking at the future of electric vehicles and its battery. And that lesson kind of, make me realize that playing catch up is never the best solution. So I know it's necessary, thing to do, but I would we have all many industry experts here. I would challenge them to give more advice to the government on where Canada should really invest and focus. It could be a very small but very important part of the supply chain to make sure our future is secure. My first question is actually to Mr. Killeen from PDAC. So can you confirm that Canada has a large deposit of hard rock lithium? Is that the case?
I certainly wouldn't speak to any one single deposit in terms of what its capacity and capability has. What I will say is there is most certainly hard rock potential across virtually every province and territory in Canada. I think there are known showings or prospects for lithium of various species all across those regions as well, whether we're looking at northern Quebec, Newfoundland, Ontario, all the way through the territories. So I think the central point we're trying to convey to this committee is that the potential is vast. Our industry has by and large been focused on other things for over a century. We think of copper and nickel certainly as components in batteries and electric vehicles and in technology, but in terms of those periphery things like we've been speaking about, very little attention has been wrought from Canadian industry or from provincial and federal government programs in terms of public geoscience. So it is a bit of a nuance, but it's really refocusing strategies we've had in the past and in terms of their intensity and in terms of their intent to understand where critical mineral potential lies in Canada. I think our members, you'll see them active all across the country in various forums in terms of exploration for critical minerals. But as I mentioned at the start, less than 3% of domestic activity, we understand, last year went towards things like rare earths or lithium or cobalt. So we do see a need to incentivize that end of our industry to try and draw more attention. Thinking again back to the question was asked earlier. Apologies about our capacity. there are over 950 companies listed on the venture exchange today that operate in the mineral exploration industry. That represents over 50% of the venture exchange companies that are listed in Canada. When we think of the overall TSX, 35% of that entire listing or of all listings is in the mineral industry. So the capacity we have as an industry to be able to ramp up whether it's exploration or extractive capacity is truly there in terms of knowledge. It's really adding in some of those little pieces that can help us accelerate the pace that we can take on.
That's quite an answer, and I appreciate the additional information you give us. But in comparison to lithium brine mining, the hard rock lithium mining, would you say it's more environmentally friendly and easier, and therefore perhaps costs less, more cost efficient?
I wouldn't want to speak to the very specifics of a cost comparison, but I would say that there's a huge amount of hard rock potential in Canada. We do have a huge amount of experience with respect to hard rock mining. The majority of mining that's conducted in Canada is hard rock, whether that's open pit, underground, and we are seeing new technologies brought to bear. Like in Ontario, the Borden mine is going to become the first all-electric vehicle underground mine in Canada, and so the steps are being taken by hard rock miners in Canada today to reduce footprint, become more efficient, and produce less emissions. So from that standpoint, yes, there's real potential to ramp up hard rock mining, potential to bring more lithium products to market. What we do understand, though, is that often lithium deposits, there's the potential that they're smaller, potentially more distally located. So we may have to consider how infrastructure and processing capacity can really accelerate and leapfrog where we may reach short ends or gaps in the supply chain. If we think of, small mines may not work on their own, but bandied together as a collective through central processing hubs or infrastructure hubs, that's what can really help accelerate development in Canada and in the north.
MP Dong, I'm sorry, that's all the time you had.
Okay.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
We have to move now to Mr. Fast for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to direct my questions primarily to Dr. Burton and Dr. Zahib. Dr. Zahib, you mentioned the timeframes that it takes to actually get mines into production, the long approval process, and then of course you have to establish processing facilities, etc. I'm curious to know, are there any operating lithium mines in Canada today?
I believe there was right now what I think the project, what I know is Nemaska Lithium, and there was Canada Lithium, but today they're in stage to finalize the process in order to produce it maybe in 1 year, in 2 years. As I mentioned, right now I cannot understand why it's taking a long time. As I was working all my life from mine to this is not make sense. If you like, okay. Canada put their establishment on mining, we should reduce the time, we should help, we should, as I said, making this interministerial committee to help for this one and making the time shorter. The process, the technology is mature, is not difficult.
Okay, Doctor, yes, sorry, my time is short. Just to understand, what is the time frame for a mine to be prospected and then to start the approval process and come into production? What is that total time frame today under current regulatory processes?
What I know, it's maybe is higher than 5 years.
Okay, higher than 5 years. Yes. All right. Dr. Burton, as we strive to develop an EV vehicle and an EV battery industry in Canada, in the short to medium term, obviously we're going to have to secure our lithium from outside of Canada because we don't yet have a reliable or functioning supply within Canada. I believe your testimony indicates that it is critical that Canada work with its allies in terms of protecting our critical mineral supply chain security. Our largest trading partner is the US. We have challenges with Buy America. We also collaborate supposedly on critical minerals. What is the state of the collaboration that presently takes place between Canada and the US when it comes to security of critical minerals?
I don't, I don't have expertise in this area, but it seems to me that if you're looking for a reliable partner in this area, the United States is a much better bet than the People's Republic of China. I think that we really, obviously, we have to diversify our sources to the extent that we can. But I think the main thing is that what we need is, when this committee issues a report, to see some vigorous action on the part of government to implement what I anticipate will be the recommendations, judging by the consensus of all the people here. This is maybe after the end of the pandemic, there'll be renewed energy in government processes, but this clearly requires a terrific amount of attention, change to facilitate getting action on this. These long delay terms that Dr. Zagreb has mentioned, and also investment by the government as a matter of national priority to ensure that when push comes to shove, that Canada will not find itself in a difficult situation.
You mentioned earlier the Neo-lithium sale to a Chinese state-owned enterprise. My question to you is, having looked at that transaction and the fact that no enhanced security review was conducted, even though the minister used the term there was a full security review conducted, but certainly not the enhanced review that can be triggered. Do you believe that the current standard that is set for conducting security reviews is sufficient?
No, I don't. I think that particularly with China, with its highly coordinated process, they can be inclined to do investments in just under the threshold areas multiply to try and achieve their, it's like playing a game of Go. They eventually surround you, and then you're stuck. So no, I don't. I think that we ought to really be looking at this in a way which is much more responsive to the reality on the ground. My concern is that, there are elements within Canada who represent interests of the People's Republic of China, consciously or unconsciously, who will probably, dampen down the enthusiasm of government for responding to this committee's report.
One last question to Mr. Fortier. How far are we away from having a full EV ecosystem in Canada?
Well, thanks for that question. So full ecosystem, we talked about the timeframes for mining, right? So that's a big part of it. But the great news is that we actually have a lot of that ecosystem. We have manufacturers. We mentioned Lion Electric. We've got, electric heavy duty manufacturers and mining manufacturers. We've got obviously an auto sector that's mature here. So the full ecosystem, it's going to take some time for sure. And that is on the upstream side, really. It's the mining and refining and processing. The great news is we've heard a lot about this. We have the capacity to do this, but it is going to take some time. That doesn't mean that it's not worth doing, right? I mean, the great news is that people are going to be driving electric vehicles for many, many years. We don't need to be doing this next year, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be starting to ramp up capacity for, towards the end of the decade.
Thank you, Mr. Fortier. Thank you, Mr. Fast. We'll move now to Mr. Erskine-Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. I want to ask Mr. Zaghib and Mr. Killeen around timelines for these development projects. Mr. Zaghib, you just indicated we need to speed up the timelines. With greater specificity, what does that look like?
Yeah, I believe for me, let's see, if we can make the mine less than 4 years, makes sense. And the transformations is about 2 years for existing materials. Because mine, let's say, can give you one example, okay? Let's mining the graphite. If we can mine the graphite, it takes, if we make it less than 4 years, we're going to have a raw material of graphite, and it takes like 1.5 years, 2 years to bring graphite to the market, transformation, purification, and so on. This number. And then if we are going to develop new materials, this is what the technology is here. Usually it takes 10 years. And then if the program with AI and supporting that, we can short it for 5 years. So 4 years, 1.5 years, 2 years, and then for new materials, less than 5 years.
That's very helpful insofar as the government could well set targets for approvals and moving things forward more quickly. To that point, Mr. Killeen, are there specific recommendations we would make other than timelines, but specific recommendations around regulation that could move things more quickly?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And if I could, I'll step back and just talk about the timelines for a moment as well. When you think about, especially from bringing in something from exploration to an extractive mine, exploration is certainly onerous. As I talked about earlier, the odds of success are pretty low. It's very capital intensive. Most of the exploration companies that exist today are pre-revenue. They don't have earnings from an operating mine somewhere, so they're reliant on going to capital markets, raising new equity, and putting that equity in the ground in hopes of finding something. The exploration process itself can be very onerous. It could take 5 to 10 years to actually define a economically viable deposit through typical exploration processes. You know, that's just the time and effort that it takes to get through that. So when we think about today, if we were going to start to activate our industry and take them to a particular place in the country and start doing those exploration activities to bring new production, you know, we might be looking at a decade away before we have that inventory we've been speaking about, which is why it's so critical in our minds to expand incentives and get those drills turning out and do that proper type of groundwork.
Can I ask on the it always seems there's two ways of the government intervening here to speed things up. One's on the regulatory side. That there may well be specific changes, and if you can follow with a brief on specific changes, I'd welcome that because I just don't have the time. But on the dollar and cent side, given the increasing value of critical minerals, I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical that expanding tax credits is the best use of public money at the moment in this space. But convince me otherwise.
I appreciate that sentiment. Let me give you a sense for the return on investment for somebody who's looking at this sector, because it's very relevant. And we think about the concept of critical minerals and the industries they're going to feed into. When we think about a gold deposit could exist theoretically in Northern Ontario or the Northwest Territories. You could have a process facility on site. You can produce the material on site. You can fly the revenue generating material off of site. So the amount of infrastructure that's required to go into that, the amount of timeline it'll take to develop the infrastructure to bring that product to market is extremely short compared to what we're talking about here with respect to rare earths or things that may not have current processing capacity in Canada. So when we think about where is the next dollar of investment going to go into the ground in terms of Canadian exploration, it's inherently attracted to those things that have a shorter timeline for investor return, like a gold deposit, potentially even like a copper deposit that's in a known area with processing capacity. So that's why we're really focused on this idea of expanding an incentive for a sector or for a part of the sector where very few funds actually go, and for something that actually requires a significant amount of exploration effort to start to understand where these production centers, where could they be? Where is the capacity going to be?
That's a helpful answer. And Mr. Breton, in relation to moving away from the critical minerals mining piece and an exploration piece towards the battery supply chain piece, I heard from Mr. Fortier, we want to do everything all at once. It occurs to me that Canada also might take a step back and say, where can we strategically add value in a global supply chain? Where can Canada add strategic value in a global supply chain?
Well, actually, right now, some companies in Canada are already working on battery packs. Some companies want to invest in battery cells right now. So we're moving forward in that direction. We have electric vehicles being built right now in Canada. So whether it's cars, and Brian Massey mentioned it, it's trucks, it's buses, it's school buses, it's snowmobiles, it's boats. So we don't have to wait for the mines to keep moving forward, but to have the whole supply chain, the mining part is very important. And we have to think about the fact that when we're talking about critical minerals, if we want to talk to our American friends, we have to say to them, it's not just about the environment, it's also about national security. And when we talk national security, the Americans listen, because these issues regarding critical minerals also have to do with defense. So to me, this has to be part of the conversation as well.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Breton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. And now over to Mr. Lemoyne for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. My question will be directed at Professor Zaghib. First of all, thank you for your testimony and thank you for the expertise that you've brought to the committee. I understand that you've been an advisor to the Quebec Minister in developing his strategy. To what extent does Quebec have everything necessary to create a full lithium chain and to become a leader? Do you have any concerns with respect to the federal government? And finally, sub-question, the centers of excellence that the government announced, could these be located close to the resources or where there's university expertise? For example, would you like to collaborate on a center that would be in Abitibi-Témiscamingue? Quebec is an excellent example of the circular economy from the mine to the cell to the recycling and the urban mining. There is complementarity here. We have to work together. The complementarity between Quebec, Ontario, and the federal government. For example, today Daniel talked about Quebec's uniqueness when it comes to trucks, skidoos, and Ford and GM in Ontario. We have to all work together. Intellectual property that should be common, the strategy to have cross-licensing, to change technology, etc. Generally, the centers are about bringing back the industry that we've let go for so long. We want this industry to be common, and the federal government has no choice. It has to be on the side of the provinces. For example, if you bring a company back where there's 25% in funding cells, the government should be investing the same amount. And I think that applies because it's in the national interest. And we have to do this quickly so that we can get involved in manufacturing active materials for anodes and cathodes and cells, because this is what's most important for the transportation industry. Thank you very much. Related to that, when we talk about catch-up, is it too late today, Mr. Bouton? I think it's important to talk about catch-up. I remember when I was a kid in the 70s, there were a lot of Americans who used to laugh at Japanese cars. And in the 80s, everybody laughed at Korean cars. Nobody's laughing about Japanese and Korean cars now because they're making good cars. So we can catch up in Canada when it comes to EVs, whether we're talking about light, medium, or heavy vehicles. But keep one thing in mind. While we're talking about trying to do a quick transition to electrification of transportation, we're also talking about a quick turn to fight climate change, and we're giving ourselves major GHG reductions for 2030. And the two goals have to intersect. We have an EV 230 plan because we want to create jobs while fighting climate change. We can't just do one without the other. Otherwise, we're going to end up at a crossroads, and it's not going to be good for climate change or for jobs. Thank you, Mr. Bouton. I hope you're not telling us that anybody's laughing at Canadian industry. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemire. And now over to Mr. Mas. No, I guess he had to leave. So over to Madame Gray for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll have my questions right now to Mr. Breton at Electric Mobility. And you were before the Trade Committee last year on our clean tech study, so it's good to see you again. So you're concerned by the dominance of one country we're seeing right now with critical mineral supply chains. Would you say that that's a fair comment? That's a concern of yours?
It is a fair comment, and I would not want Canada and the U.S. be in the same position that we were in the 20th century, with geopolitical tensions because of our dependence on foreign oil. So what we are seeing right now, we are working in an energy transition. We want to make sure that we have diversified sources of supply for critical minerals. And I think that Canada can be a reliable source for critical minerals for friendly countries like the US and Europe as well.
Are there ways your industry is being impacted right now by Canada not having a critical mineral strategy?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, not just Canada, but all of the Western countries have been not listening enough to what me and other specialists like Karim have been saying for decades regarding the transition towards electric mobility, because this is not something new. It's just that countries now are realizing that we are in the middle of a shift towards electric mobility. And now all of a sudden, everybody's waking up to that fact, and we really have to move a lot faster than we would have had to do if we had started this shift 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Great, thank you. And Are you seeing a lot of red tape right now with respect to critical minerals that might be impeding your industry?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, all of us think that the process is a bit. There's some feedback, huh? All of us find that the process is quite long and the time is pressing. So yes, I would say that we need to accelerate the process to make sure that while we're saying, you know what, we want to reduce our climate change GHG emissions, well, we have to accelerate exploration and critical minerals to make sure that we produce cleaner vehicles, not in 20 years, but in 5 to 10 years.
Can you provide any examples that might be top of mind?
Yeah, well, right now, what we are seeing is that we have some companies who are making electric vehicles in Canada that have to get their batteries from China. Because right now the process to get the critical minerals, to get the cells, it has not been developed yet in Canada. And when we talk to CEOs of different companies who are members of EMC, they're looking at this and they're saying, well, we want to make the switch, but right now it's taking too long and we need to have those batteries now.
Can you just clarify, when you say it's taking too long, is there something from a government regulation standpoint?
Well, like Karim said, when we're talking 5 to 7 to 8 years to open a mine, and to start having the minerals and then getting them processed. Right now, 99% of the lithium that's being extracted from Canada goes to China to be transformed. So this is not the way to go, we think. We have to make sure that for national security reasons, we can ensure that we have enough supply of critical minerals to be able to make those cells, to be able to make those batteries in Canada. It's not happening right now. So what we are seeing is, and I could get back to you on that with more details if you want after this panel. But yes, there are some issues with the amount of time that it takes to open a mine. But not only that, to look at processing, what can be done in Canada. We don't process much of anything in Canada at the moment.
Great, thank you. And also, we've already seen shortages in products like microchips and semiconductors due to growing demand. And if the Chinese regime were to choose to retaliate against Canada by shutting or reducing access to these critical mineral supply chains, what effects would that have on your sector?
It would be devastating because, I mean, obviously, electric vehicles need more microchips than gas vehicles. So the more technology we put into cars, the more we need microchips, and relying on microchips that come from China, for instance, can be a real issue. So I know that some plants are going to be opening in the next few months because we've seen what happens when the supply chain comes from very far away. And it's not just for electric cars, it's for everything. We've seen that with masks, So that's something that we have to look into as well. So it's not just the critical minerals, but the microchips, because we are seeing that to get them made close by brings us safety, which we haven't had in the past 2 years because of microchips issues and COVID.
Great, thank you. Yeah, if you don't mind providing that information to the committee, that would be very beneficial.
Perfect.
Thank you, Madam Gray. We'll turn now to Mr. Fillmore for 5 minutes. And just the members will have 10 more minutes, so if others want to ask questions, just let me know or let the clerk know. Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks, Chair. I'm using a new headset for the first time. Can you hear me okay? Okay, very good. Thank you. I want to start just by leaving a thought with Mr. Breton. Mr. Breton, you heard Mr. Massey mention diversifying the use of electric batteries in Canada, and he mentioned snowmobiles. I just want to surface e-bikes, electric bikes. I'm a planner, and I was the parliamentary secretary in the last parliament to the Minister of Infrastructure, where I led the development of Canada's first national active transportation strategy and fund. And I can tell you from that nationwide consultation that we undertook to develop that, there's tremendous and growing appetite for e-bikes in Canada. So I hope to see that come into the narrative. I'll leave that with you. Thank you. But the question I want to ask the same same question both to Dr. Zaghib and Mr. Fortier, although through a different lens for each. And the question is, for Canada's aspirations in this space, should we be focusing on the hard rock variety of lithium or the brine lithium? And I think for Dr. Zaghib, if you could, and I want to get the answers from both of you. So Dr. Zaghib, if you could kind of focus your answer on the lens of sort of the raw material processing and the electrochemistry perspective, is there which one should we be focusing on? Is there a better one? Thank you. And then I'll follow up with Mr. Fortier.
Yes, if we focus, it's active materials, what you call it, coming from materials that you make active cathode materials and active anode materials, because we need a lot of energy and we have low cost energy and green energy. So means that will become very competitive. And it's not very difficult and not very intensive on the finance. So it's my finance, and we call it, this is the electrode composant electrode pour les batteries lithium-ion.
Okay, and so you mentioned energy in your answer. Did you mean the energy required to process?
Yes, because usually, let's see, if we heat cathode material, we need like 900 degrees C. And if we like to make heat treatment of graphite, artificial graphite, we need like 3000 degrees C. So it's very intensive energy. And then also CO2 emission going to have active cathode materials with almost no CO2 emission, and we have good traceability for our materials. If we keep it inside Canada, we can export it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So then I'll turn to Mr. Fortier now, and I think Dr. Zaghib got to it a little bit, but when we think about the processing in Canada that can be done in a green way, so resulting in green lithium through hydropower, no global transport. We're producing the lithium in Canada. That's a good thing. It's Canadian jobs. We're keeping Canadian dollars in Canada. Adjacency to vehicle construction and all that. Could you just share with me, Mr. Fortier, whether or not your group has any perspective on which hard rock or brine, which should we really be producing to be smart in the years ahead?
Yeah, so I would say I'll answer that directly and say it's both. And the reason why is because we need a lot of this stuff, right? And so we've talked a lot about dependency on foreign powers for these materials, and that's a real issue. But a longer term issue is that actually the world's going to need a lot more of all of this stuff. So if we want people to be driving, for example, electric cars by 2035 or 2030, then we need to actually have the capacity to put these batteries together. And so the reality is we should be, as a country, supporting those companies that are prospecting and developing hard rock. We should be supporting those companies that are developing innovative solutions around brines. And they exist in different parts of our country. And that's the good news, is that different regions of this country can be involved in this, and that's a great news story. There can be economic activity across the country. And one more thing I'd say is, if we think about the electric vehicle sector as being kind of from mining all the way through to mobility and recycling, it's economically multiplying, right? So if you have, an OEM that's set up to build an EV, and that EV and that OEM sources materials within Canada, that means that we're creating jobs throughout the supply chain and the value chain. That's great news. So to answer your question, it's both, and graphite and cobalt and manganese and right? And we can do it.
Okay, thank you for that. Chair, is there any time left in my allotment?
About 45 seconds.
It seemed like Mr. Breton might have had something he wanted to say about e-bikes, so maybe I could just give him the last 45 seconds.
Well, you're absolutely right. When we're talking about electric mobility, it's really, we have to look at the broad spectrum of mobility, because we have members actually who build and sell e-bikes within Electric Mobility Canada. And it's e-bikes, it's cars, it's buses, it's trucks, it's boats, it's snowmobiles, it's water skis. You'd be surprised. Now we have mining trucks who are fully electric. That's how far we're going.
Fantastic. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore and Mr. Breton. So we have about 10 more minutes. So I'll give for each party, so the Bloc, the Conservatives and Liberals, 3 minutes each. And for the Conservatives, I think we have Mr. Fast.
Well, thank you. I'll just ask a brief question of Mr. Killeen. I've taken note of your request that the METC be increased, and we'll take that back for consideration. But you also mentioned that you'd like to see an increase in public geoscience funding. to inform future decisions on things like infrastructure. But you also talked about increasing our understanding of what our inventory of critical minerals might be. Do you have any rough idea of what our potential as a country might be in terms of rare earths and critical minerals, and what the future might hold for us in terms of leveraging those assets to greater prosperity and developing a robust EV vehicle system?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I would suggest that the government does a pretty good job at tracking some of this information. We do use the Natural Resources Canada as a good resource ourselves to understand where opportunities may lie. If we look to the current list, I think that NRCan has in terms of the top 100 exploration projects in Canada, I think there might only be one project on that list that is a lithium project. There are some uranium projects, but by and large, you will see those projects earmarked as more traditional, copper, nickel, gold, for instance. So when we think about what is our current inventory in Canada, it's not very extensive when it comes to some of the lithium products that we've been speaking about or rare earths. But from the potential aspect, we are certainly confident that that is very high. And it's not just notionally because we enjoy a big geography. It's factual because of the results that companies have had over years in terms of exploration in different terrains around Canada. So the ability to build up our inventory, I'd say, is extreme. There's a huge potential there, Mr. Fast. Now it's just a matter of directing the investment dollars and the attention towards those ends of industry. When we think about how we can accelerate that, we think public geoscience is important because we do understand there are bigger questions at play in front of Canadians right now. You know, we are attempting to conserve 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030. We are attempting to become a net zero from carbon emissions by 2050. And these are huge challenges all at the same time where we're looking to expand this industry and create more opportunities for our supply chain to feed into the global marketplace. So when we think of those things in concert, it really brings us back to the central question. We need to know where things are and how we want to develop them so that there can be those proper conversations. We can generate those social license to operate, and we can really get all Canadians behind the concept.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fast. We'll now go to Mr. Lemire for a couple minutes. I took you by surprise, Mr.
Yep, merci, Monsieur le Président. Je pensais que ça aurait été...
Thank you, Chair. I would have thought the Liberals would have been before me. Mr. Zaghib, I'd like to take advantage of your presence and your expertise to ask you to elaborate on the dynamic between Ottawa and the provinces. What is the federal-provincial relationship with respect to Quebec and Ontario now? What are your concerns? Is there a good context for the government to act now? Could you tell us what the parameters are of the opportunity in terms of critical minerals? I don't think there's a concern. I'm very optimistic that the three provinces, well, for example, with the Ontario universities, Quebec universities, and for example, we're working with Ford to have an initiative on a common platform for R&D. I could give you an example. Nickels in Quebec and in Ontario. I think that the collaboration is there. And to answer your question, there's no concern, there's no fear, but we have to redouble our efforts so that we have this secure and stable supply chain in Canada. And we should be working. And also with the U.S., it should be a win-win situation so that we can position ourselves together for the Canadian and international markets, and with the U.S. and Europe. But there is an issue in terms of processing of the resource to create those cells. Do you think Quebec is ready for this processing? Do we already have the tools to do it and to be able to supply the market, not just for EVs, but for heavy vehicles as well? I think making the anodes and cathodes, the cells are all together because it's an ecosystem. You have materials. They shouldn't have to go all over the place with CO2 emissions. You want to have the cells, let's say you could make them in Quebec. I think Ontario is capable of making the pack, but Quebec has a lot of energy. It's got Hydro-Quebec, so it can act and provide green energy that's low cost for the cells and bring the cells with complementarity to the modules and to the pack in Ontario. So I think that's the best solution for the two provinces. Last question. Perhaps something that could affect jurisdiction of Quebec in environmental standards. Do you see any possible friction between Canadian standards and Quebec standards? Who should have jurisdiction or primary jurisdiction? I would see the province first. I think the federal is important also, but traceability of the material is more, as I was saying, in terms of the provinces. And they should work alternatingly with the Canadian government, but I would wish for it to be with the provinces. That's my personal opinion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And the last round, Mr. Fillmore, for a few minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Now, we may have heard pieces of the answer to this question throughout the meeting, but I would like to try to sweep them all together into one place. We've heard a number of witnesses talk about how things aren't moving quickly enough, in terms of extraction in Canada. I know that Minister Champagne and I and Mr. Lemire, for certainement, are very eager to get products coming out of the ground in Nemaska, for example, but also across the country, the other possibilities that have been mentioned. And I think it would be very helpful to identify in very clear terms for the committee what the roadblocks are that are keeping us from moving more quickly. I'm not sure. Perhaps I could start with Monsieur Fortier or anyone else who has an opinion on that. But really, it's open to anyone who'd like to jump in. What are the roadblocks and what can we do differently?
I'll start, and I'll be very brief because I'd like to hear others. I mean, look, I think that we've heard some of the roadblocks in terms of, it takes a long time from developing a deposit to getting it out of the ground. That's a huge roadblock, and there are regulatory challenges there. We know that, but there's also capital challenges. So we need investment, both from government but foreign direct investment. We need to attract private investment. We need to double down on processing. We need, there needs to be project demonstrations, and we need to sort of see this as a bigger opportunity than just getting stuff out of the ground and shipping it overseas. So that's a roadblock. It's also kind of a cultural one too.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Killeen?
Yeah, I'd certainly like to pick up on that to take it further. Social awareness, the underlying evidence that we've been talking about, trying to generate that so we understand where these steps need to be taken. We talk about timelines for development. That's regulatory, that's technical, but there's also the social aspects we need to be aware of. And for new mines to be developed, for new processing facilities to be built, people have to understand where these things are going to occur, and we need to ensure that there's a real firm understanding of what the benefits are going to be.
Okay, thank you for that. And I saw Mr. Breton's hand, yeah.
Yeah, well, two things. First, as a former environment minister myself, I think it's very important that we work in a thorough way regarding, the environmental impact of mines, but to make sure that this process goes quicker than it's going right now. But one thing I would like to mention is that we haven't talked much about this, but one very important key part of the future of electric mobility is going to be the recycling. So what we're calling the second mining, of electric vehicles, because contrary to oil, I mean, these critical minerals are recyclable indefinitely. So we have to make sure that we develop an industry for recycling those batteries, the battery components, so that we can reuse them a second, a third, and a fourth time.
Are there following up on that? Are there implications for standards for manufacturer that would ensure that the recycling, the ability to extract the components into their fundamental pieces is as easy and accessible as possible? Is there anything we should be focusing on there?
Yeah, absolutely. And presently, the government of Quebec is looking into this. The European government European Union is looking into this right now to come up with, advanced regulations so that we have a battery passport so that we know where the batteries go, during their life cycle. And then we can recycle them. And there's a responsibility to the producer of this battery, what is called extended producer responsibility. I'm sorry about this. Yes, we have to look into this. And what's happening right now in Quebec, the discussion is ongoing. But I know that people from NRCan are looking into the discussion so that we can come up with possibly a federal regulation on getting the best ways to incentivize battery regulation and battery recycling in a responsible way, and a way that will promote innovation.
Okay, thank you. Any time remaining, Mr. Chair?
I'm afraid not,
Okay.
Mr. Fillmore,
Okay.
but good try. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I think that's been a great conversation to inform the work of the committee going forward. So many thanks to all of you for taking the time this afternoon. And I wish all members and all witnesses, our analysts, the clerk, and the interpreters a very good weekend. This meeting is adjourned.
Merci.